Hello, everyone. Welcome to Click Moments and Passionate Pursuits, The Unfolding. And we're your hosts, Beth Orr
and Bridget Burns.
And this is where you come to listen to intuitively guided conversations, which are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspective along the way. And today we are going to be talking about filters and lenses, but in particular in relation to us. Like, all of this is a filter and a lens that changes our entire perception of reality. And why this is important, we want to talk about this today, is because there is so much polarization in our world right now. There are so many times where it's difficult to understand how other people view the world the way that they do. It can present a lot of anxiety or frustration for us as situations appear really clear to us. Like there's only one way to view the world. And so as we start to understand and appreciate the vast filter and lens that all of us have, it changes our ability to relate to each other. So we want to kind of riff on this topic today. Any introductions that you'd like to do, Bridget, with setting this topic up?
Oh, goodness. No, I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to pull an example to get started with, because we haven't discussed examples before recording.
Yeah.
So that might be fun as an exercise, just to kind of apply this and see it in action.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways that I look at this. Like, number one, when I've done trainings before, I've talked about how, imagine that there are three people in an elevator, and you're in the elevator, and all of a sudden, while you're going to a floor, it stops. Well,
I've had this happen.
Okay, you're going to be able to say that one person might just be curious and kind of push the buttons and be like, okay, it might be, it's okay, it's fine. Somebody else might have a complete and total panic attack and meltdown because of the confined space or whatever is going on within them. But each person, depending on their lens and their experience, is going to have a different reaction. And so some of this is like because of their previous experience. It could be that somebody's been stuck in an elevator before. And so this is not a new experience. This is something that has been actually brought a lot of trauma, because it's bringing a trail of memories from the last time they were stuck inside of an elevator. Somebody else may be completely fine with tight spaces, has had this happen before, and it always gets taken care of within 10 or 15 minutes, and it's fine. It knows that this is probably going to be a quick deal. But everybody's coming to it with a different experience, expectation, belief, a innate comfort with being in tight spaces with strangers or not. We don't even know the dynamics of the strangers and how that could present some trauma for somebody if there's different backgrounds that make people have physical reactions. So, that's like an inconspicuous and non-loaded, but an everyday kind of example of how you could have a completely different reaction, and there's no right reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking back to when this happened to me, and I do not like being in elevators, like, at all. I'm not a big fan of enclosed small spaces. There are certain situations that I can take better than others, but not my preference. So I was at a conference. Thankfully, I was with a friend of mine. We had just left the conference during a quick lunch break to run up to our rooms and come back down. It was supposed to be a really quick trip. And I think I had one of my littles with me at the time, and they were with someone else so that I could run up to the room. So this is kind of like the setup to this. We load far too many people onto this elevator because it's a conference and we're in a hotel and everybody's got somewhere to go. So we load the people on. We get, I think we were going up. We get up like a floor and a half, and it just stops. And now I've had a fear of getting not just stuck in an elevator, but an elevator falling. Like
Uh,
my entire life, I've had this fear. So of course I go, oh, cool, an opportunity to face my fear, because naturally, like I do have fears, but I also really enjoy facing my fears within a like safe environment. So I'm with a friend.
so that's important to you. This is a
Right. Yeah.
lens, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm not freaking out, but I'm noticing that it's an opportunity for me to get to face this and combat this fear. Like I'm not going to die. You know, we have cell phone access to the front desk. We called the front desk. They're on it. The firefighters are coming. Like people are taking care of it behind the scenes. So also it was an opportunity for me to put trust in other people taking care of the situation. So that's another thing that I have an issue with, because I love to be the one who is orchestrating and controlling things, because then I know that stuff's getting done
Mhm.
because I'm in control of it. So I released control. I'm in a situation that I already had a fear around, and it was an opportunity for me to get to see that like I can survive this. This is okay. We're safe. Everything's going to be good. So that was the situation that I was in. And of course, it was kind of neat. Like, I don't know, they pry the doors open. We get to like crawl out between the floors. It turns out
New
great. It was
experience.
it
Yeah.
was, it was great. But that was my filter. And I'm grateful that in this massively packed elevator that was getting warm very quickly, no one else in it was like traumatized or having a panic response. So
Mhm.
that made it a lot easier for all of us to like keep the cool and just wait it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great example too of like, so that there was a collective energy that helped get through that situation. But if one person had been anxious, it could have reverberated off the sides of that elevator and reeked, like it could have done something to the neurobiology of the other people in that space because it was so tight and so confined and so interconnected, right?
Right.
So if somebody else had been in that same situation and they had not looked at facing their fears as an opportunity, but instead looked at facing their fears as something to be avoided, then they may have had a very different reaction in that situation. And I think this is where, I mean, this is a very inconspicuous example, but another example, if we take this before we start getting into the factors and the discussion about all the different ways that, to me, I'd like to get into, all the different ways that we have, like what participates and contributes to our lenses, and how vast does that go? But I think another example is if you were to take a look at that same kind of scenario, like you're at a conference. Let's say you're in Manhattan and you're at a conference and there's four people at the conference, and one of the people at the conference is they're all walking to a restaurant. One of the person walks to the restaurant and after lunch needs to go home because they don't feel good. They're nauseous. Another person goes to lunch and is like just kind of quiet afterwards. Another person goes to lunch and they're like, this is like nothing's changed, everything's fine. Well, now you find out that, well, they just walked past where the trade center was, and everybody has a different experience with that day. You have some people that have a very traumatic reaction because they remember every time they walk past this particular stretch, it brings up a physiological reaction. One of the people understands that and knows to go home and take care of themselves. The other person doesn't necessarily make the connection that the nausea is related to an experience that they've had in the past and it's disconnected from the context. Somebody else is completely oblivious that the other two people are even having a reaction to that. So could take it to be that it's something in the conversation, maybe they had some food, but they're going to interpret your response with the nausea through the lens of what makes sense to them because they didn't have the trade center incident happen to them directly.
Yeah.
You're not saying that. So they're not taking that in as a piece of this. So the less communication we have as to what is happening and sharing it with the people around us, the more we're contributing to the stories of the people with us, because those stories are all we have. We're just sharing, the story because we don't know, we don't have a larger context to what can, what's happening.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know I've had this conversation with my children, so it's very interesting to have been a part of a pivotal historical moment for which um important individuals in my life were not even born yet. So I remember this happened when I was teaching as a teacher. I got to talk about where I was and what happened and witnessing it firsthand and having been in school at the time that it was happening. And telling them about that and them getting to ask me questions and them like feeling like they were like touching history firsthand, which is so interesting. And then with my own children, they're like, it feels like it was forever ago for them because they
Mhm.
weren't born yet.
Right.
But then it was monumental for me. Like I remember I could tell you where I was sitting in the auditorium when our
Yeah.
principal came and delivered the news. I
Yeah.
could tell you what she said. I could tell you where we went after that. I could tell you the class that I had after. Like every part of it is like etched, burned into my memory. So yeah, that's really interesting. And it also makes me think hard about the writing of history and the study of history.
Absolutely.
Because if we're talking filters and lenses and experience, there could be one pivotal event and millions of different flavors of that event. Like each person is going to have so much nuance built into their experience of it, and every single one of those stories is valid and true. So
Absolutely.
what do we do with that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think like even as you were describing, I knew where I was and what I was doing and all this, I was like, I was having my own reaction. I was thinking where I was and what I was doing and because it's a traumatic defining moment in our history where everybody was suddenly not busy. Everybody went from to
Yeah.
everybody, everybody. Like it was a collective disturbance
Mm,
in our society. It was absolutely a collective disturbance where everybody suddenly was paying attention, and the thickness and the awareness of how that collective moment like affected, like imagine the elevator situation with one person with anxiety is what we experienced in the entire world collectively. We had a surge of panic and grief and horror that affected everybody, right? And so like as like I was thinking about how like I was like your kids with the Vietnam War listening to people talk about that, or my grandfather talk about World War II or the Korean War. And it's like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Ooh, tell me more." But it's not personal to me. It's just like something I'm taking in like a TV show. It's secondhand. Like, yeah, I might have a reaction. I might be like, "Oh," but I don't feel it. It's not embodied in me, like in this real visceral way. And so when you say, how do we look at history and how do we look at history and be able to address that there are multiple lenses and perspectives that give a total view to what was occurring? I think it starts with the desire to have a holistic lens that represents the embodied experience of the people that were going through whatever historically happened. And when
I
we don't
just
have a holistic lens, it's not an accurate attempt to do that. Yeah.
I just pulled a book. So I had an excellent American history teacher in high school, and this is a book that was recommended strongly, and something that I think if the concern about getting history correct and about understanding it better is something that someone wants to, this is like a dip into it. It's called Lies My Teacher Told Me.
Mm.
And I'm sure there are others out there that are far better, but this is a good start, a good starting place to digging into just recognizing all of the things that were kind of fed to us as students of history
Hmm.
that weren't necessarily even based in fact, or that were based on skewed versions of those facts and didn't take into account other voices that were probably most strongly affected by the events.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's interesting how, we always have like second edition, third edition, fourth edition books, like even in our history books, we have updates in those books. And it's like, if you were to look at a first edition history about a particular incident, even when it comes to 9/11, it's going to be a different, like, we learn things over time about what really happened. If you were to look at like somebody describing that incident week one compared to
Mm,
year one after, compared to 10 years after, our understanding of what actually happened um, grows based upon
mm,
the perspectives of the people telling the story about what actually happened. And it always takes time, right, to
yeah,
be able to get
yeah.
it right. And something else I'm actually reading, and I've talked to you about, I'm reading My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Manikim. And I think one of the things that he's talking about and illuminating is how our history and our experience with each other in this world is definitely impacted by our race, by the color of our skin, by our experience with different people, um, based on that. And I think that's one lens, but it is such like there's like big L lens and smaller L, like, but it's because some of it is like your personal experience, and then some of it is like a collective experience. And when you're growing up in families and you have this like intergenerational transmission of what is believed, what is expected, what we honor, what we forget, what's important, all of it gets handed to us. And then we have to parcel out what's ours, what do we keep, what are we letting go of, what changes because of our now new lens, because we have different experiences than the first experiences. It like we're constantly evolving our lens and filter because if we're living, we're taking in new pieces of information, which changes our belief system.
Yeah. Yeah, this has me thinking about how to become a more compassionate listener, because what that's going to require of me is first to really understand the way that I could potentially respond to a situation or a person or an opinion, like to get really in touch with the way that I will respond to entering a discussion about something, and to get to know that really well and sit with it, so that when I enter that discussion and I'm listening, I don't slip into my somatic response to this person or this opinion, but I can say, okay, I've sat with you, I know you, now it's time to sit with this and come to know this. And then in being present in a space for this discussion and in really compassionately listening, then I can just take what this person is saying and hear that what they're saying is coming from, and maybe even get curious about, so what created this lens or this filter that you're applying? Like, what in your experience, what in your environment, in your family, in your relationships, what colored that for you? And then it's less defensive and it's more curious.
Yeah, and that's a great point of, what affects our lens and what affects our perspective is in large part due if we have our calm brain or is it
Mm,
our activated brain? Because if
right.
it's our activated brain, then we're responding to stress, we're responding to past situations, we're responding to what's happened to us, we're expecting these results because this is what happened in the past, because we're being flooded with the emotions of that. And I think that gets back to what you're describing. It's really hard, especially when there's the compounded emotional, like just the cortisol and all the stress hormones being released. It's really hard, I think, for people to be able to keep their brain activated, right? I mean, this is why
Mm,
we hear people say, walk away, take 5 minutes, get your brain back online, come back in, take that time to get into your body, to recognize that you're safe, um, that there's a story that we're telling ourselves in that moment, right? If we have a script or anything that's happened to us, it's hard to get that, making sure that we have that rational brain activated so that we can think about this. But I think it's beautiful what you're describing, that if you can, like a lot of times that discovery about what's shaping my filter or what's changed is done in isolation because there's so many details. There's so much to it. It's almost like I get the imagery of the mycelium underneath the root system, that it's all interspersed and it's like, oh, there's not one thing, it's not one root. It's like it's
mm,
all just all over each other. So for example, when I think about like lens and filters, I think about race and culture and age and belief systems and supports, if you can trust them or not, if they're for you or not, if you're doing a job that you love or stresses you out all day, if you believe in success, what your spiritual or religious beliefs are, depending on your gender and how you've been treated, intergenerational transmissions, so what people have told you, right? Trauma, anything that's happened to you, my expectations about what's happening, the stress that's coming in, what I want. I mean, like, this is just off the top of my head. That's not even all the factors that are literally shaping one interpretation in one moment. Like me right now, I'm informed by all of this, and whatever you say, I'm going to respond with this very specific understanding about what you're saying and how this applies based upon my individual experience. That's it. And again, it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it mine. That's
yeah.
why people are so interesting, because it's like,
Mm,
how did you get this way? What are you
and
thinking?
so where I'm going right now is that kind of the conversations that we have here and that we model are an example of how to begin talking about what our lenses and filters might be. Because we do this often. It's like, oh, well, you said that and it made me think of this, and I said this and it pinged you here. And we never know where it's going because, I mean, I don't know your whole history. I wasn't you, I didn't live it.
Mhm.
So
Mm,
it's a great model for, okay, well, what does it look like? Like, how can we compassionately and intelligently respond when we've had to do this before, not recording, but when something that someone says or does something unexpected within us. And at least I know that, like, we have the emotional intelligence to be able to say, you know, I know that you didn't intend for this to come this way, but when you said this, I
mhm,
felt this, and I
mhm.
think this is the reason why. And I can only say I think that this is the reason because there could be so much under the surface that I'm not even conscious of.
Yeah.
But I can do my best to say, this is how I felt. And then a compassionate response that you've modeled before is, well, would it feel better to you if I said it this way, or if I put it this way, or if I did this instead? and we're just doing the best we can with what we have,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like the person to whom the statement or the question or the action is having an impact can't necessarily always verbalize why. But when you are in a safe space, when you are in a community or a relationship where it is safe and you know that person is safe, what you can do is you can start to say, wow, that was totally unexpected, but I felt this. And then just allow a compassionate response to take shape.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I feel like you're also bringing up how do we handle relationships differently, or do we, whether it's a trusted somebody or not, right?
Yes.
Because,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, sometimes it is a trusted somebody. Sometimes it's not somebody that you've established trust with yet. And sometimes it's somebody that you do trust, but you maybe can't trust, you
Yeah.
know? So there's all kinds of different scenarios um, around that. And I think then that gets into, what your lens and expectation is and preferences when it comes to how much do you share. I'm an oversharer. I mean, yeah, I'm an oversharer. But I'm also learning and appreciating that I overshare because that's what I want. I
Mm,
want to, it's my comfort to understand the what's really happening in the circumstances around me. And so I feel like the more I'm transparent with what's going on up here, and I give you context for my behavior and what I'm saying, then everybody's okay. you know and I feel like it's like that for me when other people are being really transparent. I'm like, oh, this is what's happening, this is who you are, and this is, and it informs me. But I realize that's not true for other people. I'm starting to see that if you can only take in so much at any given time, I could come in hot, right? It's like, whoa, why are you telling me all this information? I don't need to know this. Like, I don't need to know all this information. Or you could look at my disclosures, like, and really be like, depending on your lens, you could be interpreting it through a number of filters that I'm like, that is not accomplishing the safe space that I'm trying to create. If I'm trying to create a safe space and you're interpreting what I'm saying as being something that makes it distrustful because you're having to parcel out and figure out what it is, why I'm saying this, then it actually isn't accomplishing that. So this is where I think it really gets to, if you're in a relationship with somebody and you recognize that your lenses and filters are vastly different, even if you come from the same environment, you can see the world differently. Any kind of difference in opinion that creates something in your body that's uncomfortable is an opportunity to lean in, give the benefit of the doubt, and be curious and ask somebody, hey, when you said this, what did you mean by that? It's like what you were saying. What
mm,
did you mean by that?
yeah.
And here's how I interpreted it. And I'm just owning it's my interpretation. I'm not even quite sure what filter it went, but this is
Yes.
the emotion that I'm feeling. And I'm willing to say that it's not true in this situation, but I right now it's disconnected from source and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah. The place where we get into so much trouble in relationship is when we feel whatever is going on and we place it back on the other person.
Mm, mhm.
It just leads to so much disconnection and miscommunication, misunderstanding. So much comes from that. I mean, it just loops around and around and around again. And I think the way that I'm learning to combat that is just to be really, really transparent. And it's scary at first because being transparent in this way is owning what I'm feeling and accepting the fact that I am complicit in causing that feeling.
Mm,
So it's so much easier to go, like that person over there yelled at me because they don't like me. And then it made me feel really, really sad and really terrible about myself. And maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were yelling about something completely different and they weren't even yelling at you. But in this scenario where we're being more emotionally intelligent, we can say, you know what? When I heard that, this is what it did. And maybe that's something I can explore as to why it is that that specific event or word or reaction made me feel this way,
mm,
and get curious, because we can only control and understand self.
yeah.
And in that situation, I'm not even in a relationship with that person, so I can't take it up with them. But if
Mhm.
I were, perhaps I could say something like, wow, you yelling just really rubbed me in this way, and I'm feeling this, and I'm just curious what was going on for you when that happened. And it just opens up the communication in a way that's so much more compassionate, and that doesn't place it gives an opportunity to take off the filters and lenses for a moment.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like when you say it that way, that it's almost like an opportunity when you're in a situation with somebody that you're trying to be connected and you find that there's a disconnection. Oftentimes that disconnection is because our lenses, we're not understanding each other's lenses. And so once you start to approach it from a perspective of, wait, if I'm going to support this person in this moment, one of the things that I could do is to try to recognize that I have my own lens. Here's what it is. It's coming up as like this right here. I understand this. But then the question might be that gets you out of the lens is to say, just out of curiosity, I'm going to ask myself, what else could this be? I wonder if I could do just like a little, like either with this person's feedback or on my own, if I were to take this behavior that I've seen outside of me, outside the context of like what's happening here, and I were just to say, how could one interpret this behavior in and of itself by itself?
Mm.
There's probably a number of, from an imagination perspective, there's a number of different ways that we could interpret the comments, the conversations, what we're seeing in front of us outside of ourselves. So if we approach it like a movie and it's just a script that we're walking into, and like, ooh, I've not seen this movie, but I'm walking into this. I wonder what's happening. It's like that third person lens. What it does is it when you start to come up with there's these 4 or 5 different ways that just off the top of my head I could see that this could be from. Then you start to say, well, how do I know my lens is the right lens? Like, I mean, I don't know. It's just it's right for me, but I have literally no other information to input right now, right? Like it's like for myself, the worst possible time for me to speak is when I'm scared or I'm freaked out
Mm.
or I'm uncertain, aka triggered. It's the worst time for me to speak because I'm not informed. I'm it's the reptilian brain, you know? Um, so this is where you hope that you have trusted people around you that can recognize that you're not okay. It's an SOS. I hear people like Mel Robbins and other people talking about their relationships with their, spouses, and they're talking about how, people recognize that and you hope that somebody's able to be the better version of themselves than what you can be in that moment to give you that space, right? Compassionately give
Mm.
you that space.
Yeah, and it's almost impossible to do that if your reaction is causing a reaction within me.
Yes,
So what
absolutely.
I have to do is go,
Yeah.
hold on a minute, time out. They're having a response. How can I show up compassionately for them? We'll
Yeah.
figure out how I'm feeling later. I know
Yep.
I'm not in danger. They are. They're
Right.
perceiving some kind of danger. So
Right.
how can I support them right now and just be present for them
Mhm.
in that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a skill that just even societally that is something that we can learn. And I think my personal belief is that some of why this is coming about is that we haven't been wired as a species to handle the amount of stress that we're under right now. We haven't been wired, like we're inundated. We haven't like really understood the amount of stress that we've been through with like COVID and just with the political divide. It's this like, I think there is a collective remembering. We have to remember, we as a society, not to digress too much, but we as a society, we're in a civil war at one point. It's not like in our little history that we haven't had a time where we were so divided that we fought each other. That is in our DNA. And we forget that this is part of us, along with all kinds of awful ways that people have treated each other, right? Like as different cultures and races, and it's like there's all of this soup mixed in from a DNA and a current level, and it's like how do we unravel that? Like how do we give proper context to our reactions when it's not just us that is experiencing it, but it's our experience plus our ancestors' experience who's passed, like they passed it down to us, like through our discussions. I mean, I remember my grandmother, my dad's mom, using bread bags as Ziplocs because like there was some sort of like impact from the depression, like that we didn't have proper ways to store things. So like we're still doing that, still using bread bags,
My
for,
family did that
you know
too.
what I mean? Like, but we do it and we think,
Right.
oh, we're just using bread bags. But there's an emotional cord of scarcity
Mhm.
that's attached to the bread bags that we don't recognize when we use it.
Yeah.
And that's just
Mm,
like a little inconspicuous thing.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's
But
all
how
happening at
many,
once.
but great example though, because how many of the little inconspicuous things stack up to create a very conspicuous
Yes.
response or feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's really relevant and important to bring up here that we've talked about when there is an energy that doesn't match what's being said. Sometimes it's not a lie. It's just that there's not an understanding of that yet. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've said something and I'm sure that this is what I'm experiencing. And then I've sat with it for a couple of days and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know that there was some of this and some of this in there. I didn't have access to it yet, you know? So, but when there's that disconnect and people are telling themselves stories and then our lenses start to hone in, it must be this and it must be that. I just like sometimes I wonder if we're any of us are ever on the same page.
I
Like,
just geeked out on this really hard. I just got really excited because, okay, this is super cool. Okay. So sometimes what happens when we try to apply our filters or lenses is we put on our transition lenses at nighttime. Like
hmm.
we're putting on the wrong filter or lens because we don't
Oh wow.
know what else to apply to. We've never experienced this
Yeah.
before.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yes.
so, oh my
Yes.
gosh. And then what happens is we're applying the wrong filter or lens and we're giving misinformation unintentionally because we don't even understand what environment we're in.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
That's like, yeah, no, that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. It's like I don't know why I was thinking like Play-Doh. And when you have Play-Doh and you have like those little filters that, and you squish the thing through, and it might do like a just a jet on this one, and then another one might do a star, and another
Yep.
one might do a square. I'm like imagining like we're putting these arbitrary, like, oh, I want a star, but I don't even know what a star looks like, so I put this. Like, you don't even like when you've never experienced what you're experiencing now, the best we can do is to say, it kind of reminds me of this. It kind of
Yep.
reminds me of that. Okay, it kind of like, here's what I want, put it here, and here's what I believe, and here's what's happened to me in the past, and here's what they just said, and so here's my filter. But yet, what if it's not like any of that, like what you're experiencing, because you don't know what their lens is, so you don't know the reason why the behavior is what it is. You don't know why they're
Mm.
saying what they're saying. Like, it's almost like if we can somehow have this fresh, almost almost like a Buddhist, like no expectation or attachment, right? If we can have that kind of perspective, like, oh, whatever it is, it'll be okay. Like, if we could just ask a lot of questions. I don't know. It's just, oh man, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So here was my thought. I'm going to drill this down into a really like concrete, simple example. I've got a coffee mug. I'm holding a coffee mug, right? Based on your filter, what's in the coffee mug? Like, hold up your coffee mug.
Okay.
Okay. So I think I know you, and I'm going to say that there's coffee with a little bit of cream in that. Is
Okay.
that right?
So far.
Okay. So if I'm holding a coffee mug, what are you
Yep.
assuming is in the coffee mug?
Coffee.
But I eat ice cream out of coffee mugs, and you don't know this about me yet. I'm not lying. It's true. It's the perfect portion
Interesting.
size. But if
Yeah.
I'm holding a coffee mug, there could be ice cream in that,
Yeah. I
right?
eat
But
soup,
great,
right?
fantastic. Same reason.
Right.
Yes, right. But we're going to filter it or put our lens on it, and it does. And I use that example because it's not dangerous.
Yeah.
That's not a dangerous example. It's a simple way of looking at this.
Inconspicuous.
Right. But it can be dangerous
Well, it goes to
when,
show you how far off it can get because,
yep,
like, literally, like, imagine if you held up a coffee mug in a conference center and said, what's in this? And one person said soup, and somebody else said coffee, and somebody else said tea, and somebody else said my smoothie, somebody else said, ice cream, somebody else said, mac and cheese.
whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the story we're telling ourselves with something that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't have an impact on each other. But how many times are we in business or our personal lives and we're in relationship? And anytime we're in relationship, it does matter because that
Yeah.
person, their energy, their interactions, their interpretation of what you're saying affects your interaction.
Yeah. And if we take it a step further, it affects it within the web. So there's
Yes.
an energy that you're receiving and giving without direct communication. And you've intertwined and entangled yourself with this energy. And a lot of people are unaware or may not believe that that's actually a thing. And then we get to this place of like, wow, I'm feeling all of these things, and I've had seemingly no interactions with anyone, and yet what is the source of this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking, I was thinking about the capacity and the responsibility that we have and the opportunity that we have to affect other people around us in a compassionate and intentional way.
Mm,
Not just by thinking about how our behavior affects them and being responsible for that, but also when possible, not brushing past people that are in pain. Like I think I always think about homeless. I worked in homeless services for over a decade, and I think about how many times we go by a homeless person and we don't see them, or we go past them. And I think, like, if you knew the lens of that person and the pain that they were in, and how, like, literally just like anytime I just say hi and I make eye contact and it's a genuine I see you, like, I cannot tell you the number of times that moment you see that person tear up or get excited. Like, your money and food is important, but just seeing that person sometimes is something that is incredibly important in that interaction. Like, thinking of it from that lens and filter, like, how can you do something really amazing for somebody by just putting on a lens or filter, like, shifting it? What would it
Yeah.
be like to be in this person's position? And I think this gets to, like, we started this with, the point of these conversations is to, in this world where we're so polarized and we're struggling to see the best in each other, and part of seeing the best in each other is to listen and understand from that person's perspective. How do we do that more? Like,
Yeah.
how do we increase our capacity to do that? And then, what do we do when we mess up? You
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
like, when because we inevitably will. How do
Yeah.
we reconcile or do better when, obviously there's a different answer when there's somebody in front of you, and then it's different when you don't have somebody in front of you. Like, how do you reconcile that? you know but increasing that lens is important.
Yeah. Mm. Beautiful. Anything else you
Yeah,
think we
I
need to
I
add?
I think something that I kind of want to talk about is that as we're looking at this filter and as we're shifting it, number one, I think just being aware that we have these different perspectives. And so if you if you truly want to not, which, by the way, this is a very violent and aggressive stance to put your opinions on other people, right? If you truly want to understand somebody, they have to be willing to engage in that with you. But having this awareness that your lens is different from somebody else's lens, and if you really want to extend compassion, it doesn't mean explaining to them what your lens looks like. It means listening to what they're,
Mm.
right.
Yeah.
Another thing is, as we're looking to shift our filter and lens, I think it's important to, sometimes we have blind spots. And so to ask our friends and trusted others about, like, I remember one time I asked, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I asked one of my friends, I said, "Hey, you know, I don't know. I was thinking the other day, maybe I do have anxiety." And I mean, they just were doubled over crying in tears. Luckily, I love this person dearly, but I was like, they're crying and they're like, "Are you serious? You're questioning whether or not you have anxiety?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess that's a solid yes." Oh my God. So, our friends and our family oftentimes know us really well. And, all joking aside, of course, there are times in our lives where different parts of us get ramped up because of the situation. And that's information to us. And the times that I have been anxious in my life, it's trying to tell me something. And so sometimes our lens and perspective and filter is giving us information that says this is something to attend to. This is something to take a
Mm.
look at. If this gives you anxiety, what can you do about that with increased awareness? How
Yeah.
can you can keep responding to it and try to calm down every single time, or you can deal with the root of it. you know there's a couple of different approaches. Another shift that we have is to slow ourselves down, um, to learn techniques like meditation, to, in my mind, something that's really important is to strengthen our mind, body, and spirit and make ourselves the strongest vessel that we possibly can be so that we can be in a space that we can withstand what we're coming up with, and we can take the emotional intelligence that we're like what's coming to us and be responsible for that. But I think slowing down and making sure that you're present and trying to connect to the true sources of what something is bringing up in you versus the easy answer that oftentimes is not anything related to what it actually is. That's just the trigger. It's not the root,
Yeah.
you know. So I just wanted to throw those couple of things out there because I think people might be interested in trying to understand, well, what do I do now that I know that I have this very specific lens? How do I connect with other people? And there are very tangible things that we can do to improve the scope of our.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that I just want to add, because I know that in your work with individual clients and in my work with individual clients, this is something that would be a beautiful topic to tackle, to role play, to strategize, to question around. So that's something that approaching this work with a coach who is a trusted other
Mhm.
would be an excellent opportunity to dig into.
Yeah, yeah, especially as we develop that relationship and we have that trust in that relationship to be able to work towards expanding that view.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well,
thank
a
you.
special thanks to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for our cover art. You can learn more about Melissa and her work at melissamossart.com. And a very special thank you to Cloud Cult for our intro and outro music from their song, There's So Much Energy in Us. You can learn more about Cloud Cult at cloudcult.com. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our listeners. And we send you peace, love, and light.